Today we are going to learn how to make this hat right here. And you can see it's different than a typical tube hat that you make in a circular knitting machine. Now the problem I have with the typical tube hat you make on the circular knitting machine is it's always a little bit too small for anyone's head, unless you're a toddler. See how the stitches stretch out a little bit here? That's pretty normal for a tube-made hat on a 48-pin circular knitting machine. So I have the Centro 48-pin knitting machine, and I think these are a good size for somebody with a small head or somebody like a toddler or a young child. But for a person with an average size adult head, it's a little bit too tight. So I'm going to show you how we make this one today. Very well fitted. It's not too tight. It doesn't stretch out the stitches like your tube. The caveat is this one is really simple to make, right? You just put it right on the 48-pin machine, knit about 110 rows, and you cinch the ends and you're done. To make this hat, you're going to need a 22-pin circular knitting machine, a 40-pin circular knitting machine. I am using the Centro, Fiskars scissors, darning needle, 4.25 or 5mm crochet hook. You are going to want a ball of scrap yarn for your 40-pin machine. You'll want to do at least 5 to 10 rows with your scrap yarn. I'll show you how I cast on. I want to start between your black and white pin right here. Put about 4 inches in the center and make sure that the yarn is inside of the hook of your pin. You're going to go around the back of the next pin and back underneath the next pin. So you'll rotate between the back and underneath or in the front and back and in the front of each pin, all the way around all 40. You're just going to rotate in and out, or behind and in front, ensuring that the pin is catching it with its hook and drawing the yarn underneath. You should end right here on the back of your last white pin. So feed the yarn into your yarn holder, into your tensioner. You want to crank about a total of 5 to 10 rows using your scrap yarn, or waste yarn as some call it. I did not touch my row counter yet, but I will once I'm done adding the waste yarn to this. We're going to end it right here in between the black and the white pin. Take your waste yarn and make sure it's under the last white pin's hook. Put it in the center of your machine. I am using impeccable yarn, and it is 187 yards or 3.5 ounces. Now, I did use the same exact skein for another hat, so you can see I didn't even use 50% of it. So you will not need the whole thing, but it's Pixie Bloom variegated. This one calls for a 5mm hook. Grab your main color yarn that you want for the top of your hat. Place the main color yarn into the yarn feeder right here, and on the tensioner down here in the tensioner, and place about 2 to 3 inches over into the middle, and ensure that that first black pin right here is catching the yarn under its hook, and that every hook afterwards is catching as well. Ensure you also start counting your rows or attach your row counter. Knit 90 to 95 rows depending what width you'd like your hat to be, and then grab your scrap yarn. Here I am at the end of my rows. Take your scissors and cut your yarn, leaving about maybe 6 inches total. You don't need too much yarn, because what you'll do is grab your scrap yarn again. Now, these weights are basically weights that I've attached. They have adhesives already on them, tire weights. I'll link that in the description below, but it helps create tension down on the yarn so that it helps get on these needles the way they're supposed to. It helps provide a little tension going downwards. That's what these are for. A little ball of scrap yarn. Place that into the yarn holder, cranking around, making sure that it's caught under that first black pin, and go around at least 5 total rows with waste yarn. When you've gotten as many rows as you need with your waste yarn, place the remaining waste yarn down the middle, making sure it's in underneath that last black one, and then you'll just crank around. To cast off, you just crank around and remove the project from your center. Go around twice, it takes it right off. Now that your tube is off, I have a length that looks like this. You'll need your crochet hook handy. First thing you're going to do is close your tube. I'll show you how. Grab one end, make sure that the 2 yarn ends are outside of the tube. Find your first stitch So here's your yarn end. So that is stitch number 1. You're going to count half the number of pins that you have on your knitting machine. So we used a 40, half of that is 20. So we're going to count 20 total loops. 1. I should use different colors that are easier to see a contrast in color between the two, so bear with me here. You can see that the main colors is gray and then the scrap yarns is kind of brown-green. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. This 20th loop that we just counted, grab your crochet hook and from the outside, put it in. I like to rotate my work so that it's facing like this, making sure those 2 yarn ends are on the outside. First thing you do to close your tube this way is with your crochet, go inside that loop and pull it through the loop on your hook. And then you're going to go down the bottom one and again go from the inside outwards and pull the loop through your loop on your hook. And we're going to go back to the top one, go from the inside out, pull the loop through the loop on your hook, go through the next stitch from the inside out and pull that loop through the loop on your hook. So you're going to continue this manner, alternating between the top loop and the bottom loop and pulling it through the loop on your hook. If you did a full count of every loop that you've done, it'll be 40 because you have a 40 pin machine that you did this on. Continue doing this all the way to the end. At the end, it gets a little tricky. I'll show you how we close out that tube or that last stitch on the tube. And that'll be one end. So you're going to do this on both ends, but continue doing this. I'll show you how we get to that last one. Here we are on the last few loops. 2 on this side and 2 on this side remaining. So I just completed 1 on this side. So I'm going to go back over down to the bottom and pull that through. And back up to the top and pull that through. And go through this last bottom loop here, pull it through. I know I had 1 more loop, which is this one here, and pull it through. The last thing you'll want to do is grab the yarn end of the main color and pull that through the loop to secure it. To remove waste yarn from the end of your tube. Now this is the tube that we cast on with, therefore it's a little more difficult. So all you have to do is locate the top yarn end. If you pull on it, you can see where it's loose on these loops. And what you want to do is remove it from these top loops here. See right here? So you're going to remove it from those top loops. So this is the cast on waste yarn. It's a little more difficult than the cast off waste yarn. You just have to pull it through the very top loop layer, all the way around till it's off of every single loop that you had, the first row. And then once it's off of all of those loops, you'll be able to yank it off pretty easily. You can see right here where that's my last loop that it's on attached to. So just yank that all the way through. Now you'll be able to remove your waste yarn pretty easily by just pulling on the yarn end, and it's going to come right off like that. And I like to save my waste yarn for the next project, especially because I already know it's sized enough for a 40 pin to do about 7 rows on my 40 pin. So save that for your next 40 pin project. What you're going to do on this end, which is the cast off end of the tube, again, make sure all the yarn ends are on the outside of the tube. Find your first loop, find the yarn end here of your main color, and this is your first loop. Count back from 20 total loops, and on the 20th loop, you'll put your crochet hook through it on the outside end, just like we did before, and do your alternating closing of the tube all the way to the end. So it's the exact same way. It's just that when you cast off, you're able to just pull, and I'll show you how. This one was a bit tricky because the colors are way too close, but just at the end here, pull the yarn end through. And again, you want to make sure you use really contrasting colors between the main color of your yarn and your waste yarn. I did not do a very good job of that. So now you can just pull on your yarn end and it's going to come right off for your waste yarn. After you're done doing this, it's important to check that you've actually caught every single stitch, because if not, you can always go back and fix it fairly easily. If you don't check it, you may have dropped stitches and it's going to unravel your project. So you just check to see if you've accidentally missed one, which happens. It's okay. So we're going to seam up the 2 ends together seamlessly as possible. So attach a length of yarn to the end if you didn't have a long enough yarn end to play with. So I went ahead and started by grabbing the first 2 stitches on the one side, and then I'll go to the other side and find the first 2 stitches on that side. And what you're going to do is alternate between one end of the tube and grabbing 2 stitches and the next end of the tube and grabbing 2 loops or 1 stitch. This is going to make it as seamless as possible in this way I like to do. And it's pretty simple. It's not overly complicated or requiring too many steps. You just rotate back and forth, identifying the 2 loops that are next, going over to the other side of the tube and identifying the next 2 loops, alternating sides. And then you can see it's loose right now, but at the end you'll be able to pull them together and it'll tighten it up a bit. And you don't want it too tight, but you need to have it snug enough where it looks as seamless as possible. And if you keep alternating between the 2 like this, you should end up with the right number at the end. And here I'll show you what it's going to start looking like. Right here, you can pull on your yarn end to tighten it up, and it'll look much more seamless at the end there. So continue doing that all the way and seam it at the end, and then we'll work on the next tube. I had just enough length to finish up the end here, which I guess was about a 10-inch length, but I definitely recommend having at least 18 inches so that you have enough to play with just in case it gets too tight. All right, look at that. See, pretty damn seamless looking. And what you'll do next is just secure your yarn end. I like to just tie it here to the end. And I will secure that again when we attach the next tube to it. You can see how seamless that looks. You can barely tell. On the inside though, you'll see this is the inside, and it's pretty more obvious. That's okay, because it's the inside of your hat. This is where you crocheted it closed, then attach the 2. So this part is going to be the top of your hat. Now grab your 22 pin machine and your second color of yarn that you want. Again, I use maybe a third or less of a skeiny yarn, especially for the 22 pin. I used about a third of a skeiny yarn. Just so you know, the second skeiny yarn, I said I only used about a third. I used the Lippy Rose color. With the 22 pin machine, cast on again with your waste yarn. Do 5 to 10 rows with the waste yarn. After you've completed casting on, place the waste yarn in the middle, making sure it's underneath the last white pin. Add your next color yarn, which is going to be the brim part of your hat. Make sure it's under the black. Knit the same amount of rows that you did for your main color. This is the cast on end. Find your 2 yarn ends and pull them out. And you're going to come back, count back 11 stitches this time because you used a 22 pin. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Go ahead and put your hook in from the outside in. Orient your work so it's easier to work with. And you're going to do again where you rotate from the top to the bottom, the top to the bottom, and picking up each stitch along. So from the inside, and place your hook in that first loop, around that first loop. Try not to catch your scrap yarn. Pull it through the loop on your hook. Go to the next loop, pull it through the loop on your hook, find the next loop, pull it through the loop on your hook. Continue in this manner for all 22 stitches by grabbing loops and pulling it through the loop on your hook. This will help close the tube end. Do this on both sides. I'll show you again what we do at the very end when you close the tube end to secure it and remove the waste yarn. I'm at the end, and you can see the last 2 stitches I need to grab before I secure the yarn end. I finished up here, so I'm going to go down and grab this second to last stitch and pull it through the loop on my hook. And now go to that top one. See, it gets hidden sometimes. It's right there. Pull it through the loop on the hook, and to secure it and fasten off, grab the yarn end and pull it through the loop on your hook. Now this is the cast on, so you're going to need to again find that yarn end on the top and pull it off all the top loops. And do that all the way around so that you can remove your waste yarn from your project and start on the other tube end. Show you here, you can see where it's on all these top loops here. And this is the last loop it's on, so I'm going to cheat and just pull it off of that all the way. And there we go, it's off. You just pull on the yarn end now, the waste yarn, and it'll come right off your project. And again, you want to check the very end here to make sure you've grabbed every single loop and stitch, because if you didn't, you'll have a dropped stitch and it'll unravel. All right, so go ahead and go to the other end now. Take all the yarn ends out. Count back 11 from this first stitch, which is the stitch next to your yarn end here. So there's 1. I'll count back for you again. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Here's the 11th loop. Grab your crochet hook and go from the outside in to pick it up. Now it's on your hook. Orient your project. Now starting from the top loop, pull it through and go to the bottom loop. Pull it through. Continue alternating between this top loop and the bottom loop, all the way to the end, and do the exact same thing. Since this is the cast off end, all you have to do at the end to get rid of the scrap yarn is pull on it. It'll come right undone. That's why it's more important for your waste yarn and the cast off to have maybe closer to 7 or 10 rows, whereas the cast on, having 5 rows is really all you need. I've completed closing the tube. Now I just yank on the yarn end and it comes right off. Now check your work. If you have any drop stitches, pull on it to really check. It's usually going to be at these ends. It's usually this stitch that I miss, if it's any. And looks good. The next step is grab a length of your pink yarn and your darning needle. Close it the exact same way. Start with your first 2 stitches here, and I'm going to pull my length of yarn through that. Grab your other end and locate the first 2 stitches. What you want to be the first 2 stitches. I'm going to go ahead and count these as the first 2 stitches. Pull that through. Now grab the next stitch, your next 2 loops, and locate the same on this side. So you got to just pick it and go with it to stay consistent. That's what I'm going to go with. And we're going to go with these 2. Continue this method all the way around till you get to the end, and then we're going to attach it to the top of our hat, and I'll show you how we shape the hat after that. Here at the end, to secure it, I'm going to just go through the top, and I will secure this again when I attach it to the top of the hat. So what you got, it should be 2 ends here, like that, and you're going to attach these 2 together. So grab a length of yarn you'll need. I would recommend at least the full length of this times 2 to make sure you have enough yarn to seam the 2 together. And I'll show you how I seam it next. Grab your length of yarn, and I'm going to just knot it to the piece that's attached to the brim just to secure it into place. Went ahead and secured it, and I have the top and the bottom, the right sides facing outward and pressed against each other. Don't worry about the yarn ends. I just keep it on the inside. You'll have to weave those in or knot them better later. Key here though is to pick a row and to stick with it for both of the sides, because what you're going to do is seam the 2 together. See how it's on the same row now? I'm going to make sure I stay on that same row as much as possible. And you're going to pick up 2 loops on the inside of that stitch. Weave your yarn through it. Next, you're going to pick up 2 loops on the inside of that stitch. Don't worry about tightening it too much. You can do that at the end, and I'll show you how. You don't want to make it too tight. You also don't want it too loose, but you definitely don't want it too tight, or else it will be too tight on your head. So we're going to continue this pattern of picking up 2 loops from the brim and then the 2 loops from the top of your hat, making sure that you're staying on the same exact row that you started with. So if you hold it like this with the rows lined up like that, it's going to help you make sure that you stay on the same row all the way down. And you just stick your needle in there to find those 2 loops. The next one. And then again on the next one. Okay, so continue this all the way around because I'll show you how much tension you should have to tighten this. You don't want to wait till the very end though. You do want to start tightening it loosely as you go along. Otherwise it'll be too hard to tighten it up at the end. So you can see here, this is about how tight I make it. But if you make it too tight, then you won't be able to stretch it to fit over the top of your head. And see how seamless that join is now? You can barely tell it's there. When you think you're done, tighten it up a bit, but then what I also want you to do is give it a bit of a stretch here to make sure that you think it can fit over your head or whoever's head you've made this for. Because sometimes when you do this type of seam, it can be too tight, but it is very seamless, as you can see. Go on the inside now. You want to secure your ends. If there's maybe a little gap sometimes in the middle and the last seam there is, just put your yarn through it, seal this up, tie off the ends here. Now you should have something that looks like just this tube. And I still have the wrong side out. Flatten it and make sure that it's as flat as you can have it at the top, because what we're trying to do is get the top seam here. We're trying to get the top row. So I'm just kind of pulling on it and making sure it's even all the way around. Because what you'll do is you're going to choose a row. You're going to kind of do a drawstring effect. So you're going to just put your yarn through top, leave a length that's not going to come undone, and just go to every other loop. It's not as important because all we're doing here is to make a drawstring. I'm still going to choose one row to go through and just pick up every other loop or so to make a drawstring basically. Try as best you can to stay on the top row or whatever row that you've chosen just for consistency. And pick up every 2 little loops of yarn. And end where you can put your yarn through the same hole that you started with. Once you've done that, you'll have the ability to pull it tight and close it up, because this is the top of your beanie now. And I know there's going to be a bit of a gap, but that's okay. What we're going to do is we're going to tie this one, and then we're going to use our darning needle again and weave it through a few times to close up this gap that's going to inevitably be at the top of your hat when you do this initially. I just like to tie up the first one a bit snug with a knot. Then I'll grab my darning needle again, and thread it, and go around. You can see here where the hole is. See my finger poking through? This is where you ended. So what I'll do is I'll just go through a few loops here and there, go around, and just make it as secure as I can to get rid of that hole. I went around at least one more time, catching all the loops, and then went directly across and knotted it once again, real secure. Now you could leave this length of yarn and your darning needle and draw your needle up back through and add a palm to the top of your hat if you desired. I am not going to do that, but that's what you could use that extra length of yarn for, is to make a secure a palm to the top of your hat. Next, make sure you get rid of this extra yarn here. And there you have it. The hat is complete. This one I did with 91 rows because I wanted to test out how wide it would be compared to my head, and I actually like how it's a little tighter. So this one I did 91 rows. It's tighter on my head, which I do like. This one I did 95 rows, which is a lot looser. You can see there's more give here. So I would recommend 95 for a medium-sized head, and I would recommend 91 for a small-sized head. And if you have maybe your husband or a person in your life who has a bigger head, I would recommend 97, maybe 98 rows total to make it a wider. If you want to do a beanie that's more of your standard tube beanie, that's much easier to do and much faster to do, I will link the video next.